Hi everyone, welcome back to Ukulele Beginners with me, Matt Stead. This is an exciting day because we're going to start to actually play our ukulele together. We're going to have a look at how to hold chords down with our left hand. We're going to look into all those little tiny micro details that many teachers leave out but are really crucially important for your learning. We're also going to do a little bit of thumb strumming with our right hand to allow you to play songs. Not too much today because we're going to concentrate on strumming in a lot more detail in the next video. We're going to learn 2 chords, and you might think, well, that's not too much, but we really want to pay attention to how to play those chords, how to change between chords and look at the details with them. And with those 2 chords, believe it or not, you can play hundreds of songs. How cool is that? Before I teach you your first chord, just a little word about the chord boxes that will appear up in the corner to help you along. Chord boxes tell you how to play a chord, which string to press down on, using which finger and which fret to press. Now when we talk about frets, we really mean the gap in between the frets. Technically a fret is the little piece of metal which allows you to play a note or a chord. But when we say play the first fret, we actually mean put your finger in the gap between the nut and the first fret. And if we were to say play the second fret, we mean the gap between the first and the second frets. You'll notice that the diagrams are presented vertically, so you have to imagine that your ukulele is turned this way round and zoomed in. The thick black line along the top represents the nut of your ukulele, which is the bit which holds the strings in place here before the headstock. The lines going down represent the strings of your ukulele. Notice that the leftmost string represents this G string here. The next string along is your C string here, next string E, and the far right is your A string here. The lines going horizontally across represent the metal frets on the ukulele here. So here's an example diagram. Notice there's one dot on our ukulele and it's on the furthest right string across, which is the A string. It's telling you to use your first finger because there's a number 1 inside. So we use our first finger, our index finger, and it's telling us to press down on the string between the nut and the first fret. This will be called playing the first fret of the A string. So here we have our first chord already, a C7 chord, which is played by placing your index finger, your first finger, in the gap between the nut and the first fret on the A string, this one here. Now I don't want to get into the theory right now, but just think of a chord as when we strum all or most of the strings at the same time to produce an accompaniment that we could sing along to or play a melody to. The other way of playing ukulele, which we'll look at much later on, is when we play one note or one string at a time, also called a melody. So chord, melody, chord, melody. And finally, just before we really get into playing the chord, make sure that you're following all the notes from the last video on holding your ukulele. We want it to be at a 45-degree angle, nestled on the inner part of your thigh. Make sure you're not cuddling too tight against your body. Now, let's go into all the little details about how to physically play this chord. Now, there are so many little details in how to hold a chord that will affect your playing in a massive way later on. They're often passed over by a lot of teachers, but they're incredibly important. They make the difference between your playing sounding like this and this. Big difference, right? So, let's look at the first one. First of all, notice the position of my index finger. Can you see how it's towards the right hand side of this gap between the frets? In fact, it's almost touching the metal fret there itself, isn't it? Now this makes a massive difference in the sound of the chord that you're playing. By putting your finger as close to the metal fret as possible, it takes less effort to press down and get the string to touch the fret. It also eliminates a lot of those squeaks and buzzes that you quite often hear when you're starting to play ukulele. Have a listen to this. If I start with my finger pressing right up here against the nut and pick the string, listen how it sounds. I have to press really hard to get a note and there's buzzing. And then all I'm doing is moving my finger to the right, and I have a lovely clear chord. So we want that finger as far towards the right of the gap in the fret as possible. Now the thumb should rest somewhere here on the back. Some people like to move it further to the left or further to the right. But what we don't want is this thumb to ride over the top of the ukulele here like this. Look at the angle that's created in my arm already. That looks really uncomfortable, doesn't it? Notice as I drop down, I create a nice circle. You can see daylight between my index finger and my thumb. As well as comfort, this has a massive sound effect on your chord. By having the thumb on the back of the ukulele and that lovely circle, it allows just the fingertips of my fingers to press down on the strings. Now I'm playing an F chord, which I'm going to show you in a moment. The reason I wanted to show you this one is watch what happens as I flatten this hand position and take away this nice circle. Can you hear that? What's happening is that my fingers are getting forced down onto the other strings and muting them. But if I keep that nice circle and just use the fingertips, a lovely clear chord. So thumb on the back and a nice circle between your fretting finger and your thumb. Now, another incredibly important detail to note. Notice that by having that thumb on the back of the ukulele, only the tip of my index finger is pressing down on that string. What you don't want to do is use the flat part of your finger like this to press down. You can see why already. If I use the flat part of my finger, the tip of my finger is going to interrupt this string to stop it ringing out. Whereas if I get that nice circle and I use just the tip of my index finger, it's not going to interfere with any of the other strings. A lot of my students have said to me they're really worried they have quite big fingers, quite chunky fingers, and they'll find it difficult not to touch the other strings. One of my favourite players in the whole wide world, a guy called Israel Kamakaviva-Oli, the guy who sung Somewhere Over the Rainbow, he had really chunky big fingers, but he was able to get a really lovely delicate sound out of his ukulele. And it was all to do with just using the fingertips and being very careful in pressing rather than flattening down. Makes all the difference. Now finally, before we start strumming, we need to think how hard to press with this finger. A lot of beginners complain that they have quite sore fingers and ridges in their fingers when they're starting. And 9 times out of 10, it's because people are pushing too hard on this string. Now, when you're pushing a string down to form a chord like this C7, you're only pushing hard enough to push the string against the metal fret here. You don't have to grind your finger really hard down into the wood. As long as the string has made contact with that metal fret, and that's made easier by having the thumb to the right-hand side of the fret, you'll get a nice clean chord. Now, it's a really lovely way to test this. Now, what I want you to do is take your index finger and put it on that position as if we were going to play the C7 chord, but don't apply any pressure. Just literally touch that string like a feather touch. Take your right hand and your thumb and just pick ever so gently on the string nearest the floor, the A string, and you should get this sound. Now what I want you to do is ever so slowly increase the pressure with this hand, the left hand, pushing ever so slightly harder on the string. And as soon as that string rings out clean, that's as hard as you need to press. And that could be quite enlightening for a lot of people because it's never quite as hard as you'd imagine. As soon as that note rings out, that's as hard as you need to press. So just for the purposes of this video, we're going to strum very gently with our right hand. In the next video, I'm going to teach you how to strum fully up and down using your index finger. But just for now, let's just do a very gentle thumb strum, roughly where the body of the ukulele meets the neck. That's your sweet spot for strumming, where it sounds nicest. If you find it easier, just use the middle part of your thumbnail to strum down, but nice and gentle. We want this really gentle for today. If you have no nail, you don't have to have a long nail like mine. You can use the pad of your thumb. Just try and avoid catching the edge of your nail on the string because that can create that kind of twangy sound. So either the pad of your thumb very gently or the middle of the nail of your thumb. And we're just going to strum down. And all I want you to do is hold that C7 chord down with your left hand, remembering that nice circle, thumb on the back, 45-degree angle. And we're just going to gently count in time. This is incredibly important when learning to play ukulele. The timing of that right hand, the consistent strum to give us a very steady rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You keep strumming whilst I talk. Now, if you find you're getting some squeaking, just remember to move that finger along to the right hand side of the fret. Using the tip of your finger, just press down gently, strum along with me. Don't worry about changing to another chord yet. Just appreciate the lovely tone of your ukulele, the gentle sound, and that steady rhythm with your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fantastic. Well done, everyone. So we're playing ukulele, isn't it exciting? Let's add another chord in. Okay. So if we know this chord here is a C7, to change between a C7 and an F, our next chord, is going to be relatively simple. What I want you to do is take this index finger and move it up one string. That's all I want you to do for now. Now, the reason I want you to practice this one is I want you to get comfortable putting this finger on the second string up and strumming down. See if you can get this bottom string, the A string, the one nearest the floor, to ring out really true and clear. Now, what we don't want is this sound. Now, that happens to heaps of people. If it's happening to you, don't stress it at all. It happens to everyone when they're learning. If that happens, just remember to keep that nice circle and move this index finger up. So just the tip of it is touching down on that second string up. Again, if I flatten down, I have this sound, but if I just use the tip of my finger and look towards the right hand side part of the fret and just strum down gently. So what I'd like you to do before we actually play a full F chord is just to practice changing between this chord, C7, this one here, just moving that index finger up one. Okay, let's do 4 slow strums on each. 1, 2, 3, 4. C7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's move up. 1, 2, 3, 4. And down. 1, 2, 3, 4. And up. 1, 2, 3, 4, and down. 1, 2, 3, 4, and up. Just keep practicing changing between the two until you feel really, really comfortable and relax. Now, to finish off this chord, to make it a full F chord, what we need to do now is take our second finger and place it onto the string nearest your nose, the G string. Notice I'm still placing my finger towards the right hand side of the fret. I'm not over here, I'm over here. I have a nice arch, and that's incredibly important. Can you see how now we can see we've got our fingers, 2 fingers down, and they're kind of going across all 4 strings. If I flatten, those fingers are going to interrupt the 2 strings that I want to ring open. So we want them stood nice and proud, just your very fingertips on those strings.